How's it going, everyone? Ryan Patty from NJ.com here. I'm joined by my three fellow high school wrestling experts, and Bill Evans, Joe Dallas, and Jacob Ferriet. And you're listening to the first episode of Weighing In, our new high school wrestling podcast. You might have listened to the Jersey Blitz in the fall. That's our high school football podcast, which also features myself, Bill, and Joe. But this wrestling podcast will have more of that same discussion that had you guys entertained during football season. You can find this podcast on NJ.com under our high school wrestling page, but also on all your podcast listening platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, YouTube, and a bunch of others. Now, guys, I think an appropriate place to start this podcast, this first episode, is by recapping some of the things we saw in December. You know, we've got a lot to talk about on this episode. I think the Catholic school duels will be a big topic, and other top duel tournaments that were wrestled this past week, but and a lot of teams and individuals that have kind of made statements so far. But Joe, you said this between the four of us a lot, in the past couple of years about the month of December, and it's that December is kind of a preview of what's to come in New Jersey wrestling. You're learning a lot about the teams, the individuals, and just the landscape as a whole. Bill and I were at the Beast of the East in Delaware last month, and Jake was at the Sam Cali. But one thing that I learned, especially with this new scoring, is that we're going to get a lot more bonus than we have previously. First period tech falls are happening. 7 takedowns now gets the job done, and that's not even including back points. And for fast tech falls in previous years, you needed backs, but that's not the case this year. And you're seeing a lot more fast techs. You're seeing decisions turn into major decisions in a blink, and you're seeing that happen a lot frequently, not only in just at the end of the third period, like first and second periods. You're seeing matches get blown wide open very soon, and coaches talk about the full 6 minutes all the time. I think you're going to need to stress that a lot this year with what we've seen so far. So, Joe, what's kind of on your mind to start the year? What have you seen that's kind of opened your eyes?
Well, you're talking about the 3-point takedown. I understand why they did it on the college level to try and generate a little more offense because, in a lot of those cases, the kids are so evenly matched and they're so smart and tactical. There's not always a lot of shots. My concern on the high school level is going to that 3-point takedown. It's going to widen the disparity between the all around and the all year and the club wrestlers and the not so good kids. Like, I don't know that this is going to help the sport. I don't know which is less humiliating, being tech falled in the first period or pinned in 30 seconds. And my concern is that we're going to see more coaches, when a really good kid comes out to save his kid embarrassment, he's going to forfeit. So, I've seen as many as 7 or 8 forfeits in dual meets this year already. And some of the scores of bouts have been astronomical. That's my concern. I just wonder if in the long run it's not going to help the sport. Anthony Knox has a goal or could probably go out and tech every guy he wrestles in the first period. Is that good for wrestling? Is that exciting for wrestling? I don't know. And then the other thing, the being able to ride is pretty much going to go out of the sport. I mean, Bill sees a little more in the college levels. We can probably, give a better vantage point of that. But, the ability to ride is going out the window because all you want to do is get 3 points. So, going in, that's my concern. And I guess we'll check those numbers and see if we start seeing more forfeits or an absurd amount of, are we going to be, Bill, are we going to see, dual meets that are 60, 70 points scored?
Yeah, I definitely have noticed a jump in the in the scoring, and in addition to what you're talking about with the 3-point takedown, now you can get up to 4 points on back. So yeah, it might not take away that ability to ride because if you can turn kids, you can score now a lot easier than before when it was only 2 or 3 points. Now it's 2, 3, or 4. Also, the out of bounds line I think is a maybe an underrated rule change. Previously, if basically it was kind of up to the discretion of the referee, to be honest. It was very unclear. Different refs had different rules, but typically, if one of the wrestlers was completely out of bounds, they would stop it. Now the new rule is pretty clear. As long as somebody has any part of their body in bounds, then you continue to wrestle. So now you see a lot of kids on that out of bounds line trying to keep a toe in, or, trying to just keep that other kid's hand in, just so they can get that pin or get those extra back points. So I think that part of it has made it a little better. That I like, but yeah, we were definitely seeing a lot more points in duels, in matches. You're seeing some of those 22-11 bouts that have kind of gotten blown wide open. It's still a little early for me to figure out. I do feel it's definitely better on the college level because there isn't as much of that discrepancy. Not sure if it's great for high school yet, but there's definitely a difference.
Yeah, and to Joe's point there, obviously I think his point about, the marginal wrestlers and the guys just starting out is a good one, but I think also where you're seeing it make a difference is, with guys who are pretty evenly matched, if you're down 6-0 or 7-0 early, that's not a prohibitive lead anymore. And that's not a lead that, if you're the wrestler who's up, you can just rest on your laurels and be defensive because now, 2 takedowns and the other guy is right back in it. So I think at bouts where, there isn't as big of a talent gap and, there isn't as big of a mismatch, I think you are starting to see guys battle back from scores that we would have thought otherwise, oh, this kid's dead to rights. So I think that part of it has also been interesting.
So yeah, going back to Ryan talking about what we saw in December, and us being at the Beast of the East, Joe mentioned Anthony Knox. Knox is, I think, one of the big storylines of this whole season now is going to be him going for his 4th state title. Only 4 wrestlers in history have won 4, and that's Mike Gray, Anthony Ashnault, Nick Soriano, Andrew Campolatano. So it's a very exclusive field. I talked to Knox the first time when he was in the 8th grade at a showcase event during COVID, when he was wrestling Luke Stanich and Alex Ninny. At the time, both those kids were in high school. Stanich went on to be a state champ and a NCAA All-American. Ninny, became a state finalist and is now at Rutgers. And Knox at the time talked about being an undefeated 4-timer and being the best ever. He lost once as a freshman at Escape the Rock in the final against a Pennsylvania wrestler. But that's the last time he's taken a defeat, and he's definitely putting himself in the discussion. To be the best ever, for sure. The way he's put up points is very similar to Damian Hahn, who I just did a story on. He's now the head coach at South Dakota State, was a 3-time state champ at Lakewood, 2-time NCAA champ at Minnesota. And I think it's brought a lot of discussion about those former greats, that we've covered in the last few decades, and who the best ever is. And I think as we kind of move toward Atlantic City, it's something we're going to be talking a lot more about as Anthony Knox is trying to do something that's pretty historic here.
Well, let me ask Ryan this question. Ryan, you've been at both the Beast of the East and the Catholic school duels, where there have been some of the state's finest wrestlers and best teams. I mean, it still appears to me we've all seen bouts in the States where 2 really good kids don't shoot and they're going to let it be settled in overtime. It just seems to me that the 3-point takedown rule isn't going to change those bouts. I mean, what did you see at those, quality tournaments, Ryan?
Yeah, I guess this is a good time to jump into the Catholic school duels and what Delbarton did there. They were dominant, absolutely dominant. Last year they beat St. Peter's Prep in the final 66-0. But then they go out this year with the St. Peter's Prep team that's got a lot back, who I'll talk about here in a second, and they win that duel, that championship duel, 50-12. You mentioned a low-scoring bout, and that's how it started right off the bat between Chase Connaught and state champ Caden Ricciardi at 138. Connaught won 4-3, and he kind of just fended off Ricciardi, everything he threw at him. Ricciardi is a, nonstop, just, shoot kind of kid. And Connaught just had, every answer, absolutely every answer. And he got an early takedown, and that kind of set the tone for the bout. It was a wild bout. And then in the very next bout, Nick Schwartz, a freshman who's been outstanding so far, Coach Stoll told me he's wrestled a gauntlet. He goes out and he beats Loudon Henry, a state medalist, at 144. And that just took the wind out of the sails for St. Peter's. They were down 6-0, and they just never really gained enough momentum to get back into it. And this Delbarton freshman class is incredibly underrated. You have other kids like Tommy Marchetti. He's had a great start to the year. Braden Jones, he defeated Sal Borrometti, a state third from 2 years ago. Ryan DeGeorge, an underclassman, he got pinned by Bobby Duffy of CBA at Powerade. He comes back and beats Patrick O'Keefe, a state finalist from a few years ago. I mean, Delbarton just put on a show. I was also very impressed, like I said, with St. Peter's and their win over CBA. That was a landslide win. We know how good CBA is. They have a ton of medalists back this year, and there's a real chance that Peters can get even more this year when March comes around. Bergen Catholic had a great tournament. It looks like they're back. They have a ton of freshmen who are really good. They beat St. Joe's, as did CBA. CBA beat St. Joe's on Criteria E. There's just a lot to dissect here with the Catholic school duels. The Green Knights look pretty banged up. Don Bosco looks pretty banged up. St. Augustine and Seton Hall Prep were also in this field. But Joe, I was very impressed with St. John Vianney. I mean, we talk about the stars on this team, but they could also be the star here in the Shore Conference this year. Tell me how competitive this team can be, and just a quick look at the Shore as a whole.
First off, what I'd like to say most impresses me about the Catholic school duels is the way Billy Ashenault, the CBA coach, has been able to entice these top programs to come in and wrestle together. Look, Bill and I have been doing this a long time. And, there was always this rule or unwritten rule where you don't want to take a team loss in December that might come back and haunt you when they start seeding the team tournament. Or I'm not going to send my best kid against your best kid because I don't want you to be able to use that in the state tournament seeding meeting. So, he gets put in the bottom bracket or the top. And what all those teams and those coaches deserve credit for is the fact that they threw those old-fashioned, antiquated ideas in the garbage can, and they come in and they wrestle. And this sport needs that kind of thinking where you're willing to wrestle good teams and put people's fannies in the stands. Little kids come, hopefully fall in love with the sport. I think the Shore is really good. I don't know how deep it is, but I mean, you're talking about Southern, St. John Vianney, Rumson, Fairhaven, all being in the top 5 of the state, and they're all in the same division in the Shore Conference. Hal, as usual, is off to a good start. John Gagliano just seemingly has kids waiting in the pipeline. Middletown North's off to a great start. Ocean's off to a great start. Hal, Middletown North, and Ocean are in the same division. Wall is young. They were the team champion at the Elizabeth tournament over the weekend, and they won the title a way that I've never seen done before. They actually won the team tournament title on Criteria. I've been doing this 47 years and have never heard of such a thing. And another team off to a good start in the Shore is newcomer New Egypt. They haven't been great the last couple of years, but Kevin English has them off to a 4-0 start. And I think they're going to be competitive in that small school division in the Shore. Ryan.
Bill, what are you seeing from this past weekend? I know you were down at Williamstown. What'd you kind of take away from that event?
Yeah, it was kind of a weird ending in that Williamstown, there's a couple 18 tournaments down in South Jersey to kick off. Williamstown being one of them. They're the only one that does it in pools. So that there's 2 pools of 4 typically. And then basically after the pool play, they go and they wrestle for first, third, fifth, and seventh. Now they only had 7 teams this year, so one of the pools only had 3. So it should have been Lower Cape May against Ocean City in the final. But since Lower Cape May and Ocean City wrestle later in the year, they're in the same division in the Cape Atlantic League. Yeah, they opted not to have their championship match. It was kind of, which I think my lead was something along the lines of the championship of the Williamstown duels between Ocean City and Lower Cape May will be decided in February at a try in Delran, which is when they wrestle. But both those teams were very impressive. Lower Cape May just dominated all 3 teams that they wrestled. Williamstown, Timber Creek, and Hunterdon Central. Scored a ton of bonus points, tons of pins. Look, they broke through last year as a sectional champion for the first time in 4 decades. Won South Jersey Group 2, and to me looked like the clear favorite there. Ocean City again was they last year they reached a sectional final for the first time ever in South Jersey Group 3. They came back to beat West Deptford. They looked like they were out of the match. They were down something along the lines. I think it was 24-5 at the time. Connor Nicoletti at 150 was about to get majored. He was down 14-4. The match would have gotten to 28-5 about halfway through and would have been tough for Ocean City to come back. Nicoletti ends up getting a pin, down 10 points. They ended up pinning on the next couple weights, and all of a sudden we're ahead and end up winning that match over West Deptford 38-34. They've got two kids in Tommy Grimley and at 165 and Clifford Dirks at heavyweight that are, in my mind, going to be state place winners. And it's been a long time since Ocean City's had a couple kids of that caliber that could go that deep into the state tournament. So I'm looking forward to seeing what both of those teams do going forward. And Williamstown, they dropped from Group 5 to Group 4 this year. In Group 5, they were kind of overwhelmed by that Southern Washington Township, Kingsway, Howell. They just can't compete with those types of teams. But in Group 4, I think they can be a contender. Group 4 is wide open. You still have Northern Burlington and Shawnee. Hamilton was in the final last year. They seem to be a little bit down. Clearview's kind of coming up. But that's a wide open group, and they ended up beating West Deptford in a match that their head coach, John Jernigan, admitted he didn't expect to win because Williamstown's still missing a couple kids, including state place winner Jackson Slotnick. So if they get healthy, they are definitely a contender in South Jersey Group 4. A lot of statements I thought were made in that tournament. And then also down south in the Collinswood Dan Trainer duels, another 18 tournament. Gloucester was the number 8 seed there. Tournament had actually gotten reseeded very late because of a team pulled out, and Gloucester ended up 8th, but they ended up upsetting Warren Hills, the defending champ and the number 1 seed. Then they went on to beat Colts Neck in the semis, which was another upset by seed. And then ended up losing to Hopewell Valley, who had a very dominating tournament and showed that they could be a real factor going forward. That this is a Hopewell Valley team that brought everybody back and is looking like a strong contender in their section as well. So I think a lot of teams in this first weekend, really kind of. You didn't get a ton of dual meets in December. We're starting to see now, once teams are getting into these duels, and especially these dual tournaments where they're wrestling 3 or 4 times, how good they are. And a few teams made a statement down here for me.
Jake, what about you? What'd you get a good look at this weekend? I know you were at that quad with Cranford, Old Bridge, Ridge, and Peaburg. I know you have a lot to say about the Boorish duels, and also some history was made at the Big North duels this season.
Yeah, absolutely. So starting up in Newton at the Boorish Duels, which gives out maybe the coolest trophy of any team tournament around. They give out an engraved log, which is very cool. Delsey went up there and dominated, which, they've won it, I think, 3 of the last 4 years. And, they really didn't face much resistance, which shouldn't be surprising. I saw them at the Cali. They entered most of their studs. They were impressive as an individual team. Under first-year coach Tom Maxwell, they're 4-0. They're clearly impressive as a dual meet team. And, I think until proven otherwise, they're certainly, if not the team to beat in Group 3, I think they'll certainly be wrestling in the Group 3 final at Jersey Mike's Arena in February. But also at Borscht, I think you've got two sides of the same coin in, South Plainfield and Paulsboro. Paulsboro, which won Group 1 last year, lost to South Plainfield, which had a down year by that program standards last year. And I think, you're starting to see South Plainfield, emerge a little bit this year and come back, round into form. And I think that Paulsboro win, even though Paulsboro is giving up 6 points and getting pinned at a lot of weights, certainly in name, it's a solid win for South Plainfield, which beat Paulsboro 46-32. And then South Plainfield was competitive with Governor Livingston and North Hunterdon. They lost to Governor Livingston by 14. They lost to North Hunterdon by around 20. But, those are matches that last year probably would have had larger margins of victory. So I think Steve Johnston has started to finally right the ship, push all the right buttons. And I think things are starting to turn back around for South Plainfield, which is nice to see. And then, at the quad I was at, which was Cranford, which made the Group 3 final last year, Old Bridge, which is trying to contend for a Central Group 5 title, and then, Ridge and Phillipsburg. So we had, I think Ridge was ranked 13 going into last weekend. Phillipsburg was number 12. Ridge was the defending Group 4 champs. But actually, the Red Devils, it wasn't a great weekend for them. They had 3 kids miss weight, which never helps. But, they lost to Phillipsburg. They didn't get much bonus. I think Phillipsburg got 7 bonus point wins to Ridge's 2, which, that's never a good recipe for success. And I think the thing that I most took away from it is Phillipsburg is clearly, I think, the team to beat in Group 4, at least in the northern part of the state. The Liners were in Group 5 for a lot of years, always ran into Southern in the team state tournament finals, could never quite get over that hump, but they've won 13 team state titles in Group 4. And I think this year, what especially works in Phillipsburg's favor is the fact that, they wrestled Mount Olive close. They beat Mount Olive 32-30, and they beat Ridge by double digits. So, some teams like Southern blow out every team that they wrestle, and that's impressive. What's impressive to me is that Phillipsburg has shown it can grind out close matches, and it can, rack up the bonus when it needs to. And Tim Longacre, the Liners second-year coach, told me, he said, we know that we're going to see those teams again in Ridge and Mount Olive, whether it's in a section final, section semifinal. And he's like, they're going to be better teams. We're going to be better teams. So, could Peaburg beat these teams for a second time? Certainly. Could those teams get their revenge? Definitely. So I think that is going to be one to keep an eye on. And I think Cranford beating Ridge is impressive too. The Cougars had 3 medalists at the Beast of the East, most of any public school. They have 3 wrestlers ranked in our latest NJ.com individual wrestler rankings. And, they beat Ridge pretty handily. And again, Ridge was missing some guys, so was Cranford. But, Pat Gorman's squad always schedules tough. They've got Southern, they've got Passaic Tech, they've got Del Val on the schedule. And this is a team that made the Group 3 final last year. And if they keep wrestling like this, plus getting some of these guys that are hurt back, like Luke Schultz, I think that that'll really bode well for them down the stretch. And then up in Big North Country, Wayne Valley won its first ever Big North Duels title. And I think the thing that's most impressive about that isn't just the 4-0 start that Coach Todd Schroeder has his team off to. It's beating Passaic Tech, who's long been a standard bearer in the Big North among public schools. And especially on the heels of what Wayne Valley did last year, where they made history as the lowest seed to ever win a section final when they won North 1 Group 3 as the 7th seed. I think there could definitely be a changing of the tide in Passaic County, in the Big North, that, I don't know if we have seen in a while or that we've expected. So I think that that's definitely something to keep an eye on also.
Now, we've rattled off a lot of teams here, but there's even more that have kind of stood out to all of us. And I guess that speaks to how good the state has been to start the season. I've been, very impressed with Mount Olive to start the year. You look at the schedule they wrestled, and it's not an easy schedule. They have that 2-point loss to Phillipsburg. We had Phillipsburg number 12 in our top 20. They had the lopsided loss to Southern, and Southern's ranked number 5. I mean, we know how good Southern is, but I mean, look at some of these wins that they've had. They have routes over Morris Hills, Warren Hills, Governor Livingston, High Point, and West Essex. I mean, Governor Livingston, High Point, and West Essex, those are 2 really, really good programs, as is Warren Hills. It might not be the program it was a couple years ago, but we all know how good they are, just over the course of their history. And Mount Olive is also very battle tested. They wrestled at Robin Left, the Mustang. They always go to Escape the Rock every year, so they get those good matches in. They have 5 state qualifiers back: Anthony Piemonte, Nico Gonzalez, Tyler Cumming, Tanner Perez, and Brandon Barris. And, those guys are wrestling with an edge after what happened to them at Rutgers last year against Ridge, losing the final 5 bouts and seeing that big lead slip away for the state title. They want to get a state title this year, which they did a few years ago. And I'm also looking at Hanover Park in Morris County. They returned just about everyone from last year. They have 7 region qualifiers back. One of them, senior Vincenzo Laval. He hasn't finished worse than 3rd in the state in his first 3 years. And, they made the Group 1 semifinals last year. And I'd like to think they'd want to be on that stage again with how much they have coming back. Delaware Valley is really good, and Jake will touch on them in a bit. But, this Hanover Park team's got championship potential. And Tyler Brandon has been spectacular since he took over the job there. And I'm also looking at some change in the hierarchy in the NJIC. I mean, Emerson Park Ridge has dominated that league for years, and they have a division title streak that goes back decades. And here comes Hasbrook Heights out of nowhere. Well, I shouldn't say out of nowhere, because they wrestled them very close last year in the NJIC finals. It came down to the final bout, but I mean, out of nowhere in terms of dominance, because they beat Emerson Park Ridge on Saturday 50-27, and they're 4-1. Their only loss so far has been to Old Tapan, and I truly think we could see a change in the guard here in the NJIC, which would be, mind blowing with how good Emerson Park Ridge has been, over the past couple decades. And Bill, what are some of the teams that you're kind of keeping an eye on in South Jersey? I know there's a couple small schools that have gotten off the hot start so far.
Yeah, Audubon in Group One is one I'm really interested in. They're off to a 7-1 start. They're a team in the Colonial Conference that tends to sometimes get a little overwhelmed by the teams at the top, the Paulsbros, the West Epfords, Collingswoods, and Haddonfields. It's a very strong group normally. They came out of the blocks this year. They beat Gloucester and Haddonfield in their first two matches, which are teams that in the past they would have struggled with. And then they went to a quad at Woodstown, which was very interesting. Woodstown, like Audubon, is a Group One team. Now they lost somewhat handily to Woodstown, but they beat Northern Burlington, who's the defending South Jersey Group 4 champ, and they also beat Long Branch, which were teams that Woodstown lost to. So, to me, maybe that Woodstown match was a little bit of a matchup issue. But, obviously being in Group 1, if they were to have to face them again, say in a semifinal, that could be a problem. But, right now, I mean, it's obviously very early, but in the power points, Audubon's 3, Woodstown's 4. They could end up on opposite sides of the bracket. They wrestle Paulsboro next week, and I'll be interested to see what happens in that match, how close they keep it, or if they could even pull an upset, because they're off to a good start. They have a senior Rocco Monteferranti down at 113, who's undefeated. He made your decision, Tyler Hildebrand from Williamstown, who was a state blood rounder 2 years ago. He's off to a tremendous start, and I think they've had some kids that have taken a big jump. So they're one team that I'm really going to be interested in looking forward. And another one's Middle Township. Middle Township last year upset Haddonfield in the first round of the playoffs. Then they lost to Lower Cape May. They brought back a decent nucleus. They've got some pretty good seniors, Maurice Matthews and Maximus Adalezi up top. Tyler King's a pretty good sophomore in the middle weights. Cameron Park's a senior in the lower weights. They have some kids kind of scattered throughout. They're 3-1. They dominated Hamilton in their first match, which again Hamilton might be down a little bit, but that's a defending Group 3 finalist that is a traditional contender. And then they wrestled St. Augustine, and they only lost by 15 points, which to me showed a lot, as much almost as any win might have. So I'm looking at them now. You go back into that Group 2 field with Lower Cape May, and then some of these other, again, Colonial Conference Group 2 teams that have tend to dominate. And I think you really got to take a hard look at Middle Township as a team that, could kind of upset the apple cart a little bit and really make a run. So, those are the two teams in some of those small groups down low that I think are really establishing themselves this year.
Yeah, and Bill mentioned Audubon. Speaking of Group 1 schools, I mean, to me, Del Val, they're off to an 8-0 start. That's a team that, by virtue of the schedule they wrestle in the division they wrestle in the Skyline Conference, that is a team that always punches above its weight. They've beaten Phillipsburg in the past. They've beaten Hunterdon Central in the past, North Hunterdon, Watchung Hills. I mean, those are all schools that are Group 4, Group 5 schools that Del Val has given every bit that those schools can handle to. And I think that's, the fact that Andy Fitz can trot out a team like that year after year at a Group 1 school shows that, the Group 1 Terriers are Group 1 in name only. They're just as much a contender for a top 20 spot, just as much a contender for a state title as any of these other bigger teams. And, especially they've got a state medalist, Jaden Perez, back. He's one of the best in that area. So I think Del Val, they wrestle Kittatinny, who they could likely see in, a state semifinal or even potentially, a section final. They handled them. They wrestled Hanover Park twice last year, beat Hanover Park handily both times. Hanover Park brings a lot back, but so does Del Val. So I'll be curious to see how that matchup goes this year. And, outside of a 14-point win over Bridgewater Raritan, Del Val's next closest result is by 23 points over West Morris. So, this isn't a team that's just winning dual meets. They're going out and they're dominating. Now, things don't get any easier for them because they've got North Hunterdon this week. They've got Phillipsburg next week. They've got Caldwell, Ridge, Cranford. So, they have a chance to really make a name for themselves again and get back atop Group 1. I mean, Paulsboro beat them last year in the state final after Del Val had won the previous two. So I think they're a team definitely to keep an eye on. And then I think, if you look at, a conference like the Greater Middlesex Conference, where, St. Joe's Metuchen has kind of been the standard bearer and has reigned supreme for the last few years. I think there are some other teams, though, that have definitely caught me by surprise. I mean, if you look at, in the white division, which is the second division of the GMC, Woodbridge is 5-0 for the first time since 2012, when current St. Joe's Metuchen coach Mike Carbone was there. And, they've got a kid in Tyler Bullhauer who's 10-2, came just short of medaling at the Cali, is a couple-time state qualifier for them. And his only two losses this year are to Santino Rodriguez from Don Bosco, who was a state medalist, and Riley Booz, who's a state qualifier from Delsey. And then, also in the GMC, North Plainfield is 4-0 and atop its division, which is the blue division, for the first time in over 15 years. And, they too have been a dominant team outside of, a 44-31 win over Passaic. Every one of their other wins has been by 20 plus points. So, are those teams necessarily going to upset St. Joe's Metuchen or threaten for, the team title race at the GMC tournament later this month? Not necessarily, but, their starts shouldn't go unrecognized. And I think, individually too, they have a chance to continue putting people on notice, turning some heads and showing, hey, there are other players in the field. So.
Well, I'm just going to say one more quick thing about the Shore because we talked about them already. The Shore has the defending Group 5 champ, Southern, the defending Group 2 champ, Rumson, and the non-public B champ, St. John Vianney. So Vianney, of course, moves up to non-public A, so they won't get an opportunity to defend that title. But I'm going to focus for a minute on the Colonial Valley Conference in Mercer County. And no, I have not lost my mind. Normally, that is a romp for Hopewell Valley to be the best team in that conference and win that county tournament. There's a little bit of competitiveness there. And the team that really has caught my eye is Heightstown. They're off to a 7-0 start. They've already beaten Robbinsville, kind of an arch rival. They've already beaten Princeton, and they have upcoming dual meets with Steiner, who's 4-2, and Hopewell Valley, which won a tournament over the weekend. Mike Russo's done a good job out there for years. But, this team seems to have a little more balance. I mean, he's got Christian Florian, Jordan Corzo in the middle. He's got a little bit of balance up top. He's got a 13-0 wrestler at 150 in Christopher Croppanese. He's got a 10-3 wrestler at 157 in Emerson Guerrera Ordonez. So, there's a little bit of interesting wrestling out in Mercer County. I don't think any other team out there other than Hopewell Valley can even get close to competing for a sectional title. But there's a reason to go see wrestling in Mercer County this year, Ryan.
Now we've talked a lot about the teams here. We've also got to talk about the individuals, and we've mentioned some, but not all of them. And there's a lot. I mean, a lot that have kind of made big statements to start the year. And we've rattled off a ton of individual tournaments: Beast of the East, Powerade, Sam Cali, Robin Left, Mustang, you name it. But these kids, have turned the heads, most here, and I've been shocked by how good Christian Alvarez is for St. Joe's. And, then again, he did drill against Rocco Delegata, all of last year, but he finished runner-up at the Beast of the East after an upset over Bergen Catholic senior Benji Shu, who's a two-time state medalist. Kind of dominated that bout. I mean, I was very, very impressed. Benji's a great, great athlete, and he really couldn't do a whole lot in that match with Alvarez's size. Alvarez is a really good offensive lineman, like Benji Shu is for St. Joe's. So that was a spectacular matchup we saw there in the quarters at the Beast. Then he goes out and he decks a few kids at the Catholic school duels. So, he's really elevating a team right now that's very banged up with injuries. And, St. Joe's can really use that bonus that Alvarez is providing them. And another kid that's kind of caught my eye is Ismail Vertador from Passaic Tech. You might remember that name from 2 years ago, but not last year because he pretty much missed the whole year last year. I'm actually going to get to see him tonight against Caldwell. We're filming this episode on a Tuesday. Vertidor was a big piece for them this season. He missed essentially like all of last year, like I said, due to illness and injury, and he's back and healthy, and he's 6-0 with nothing but pins and techs. And Passaic Tech's goal every year is to win that sectional tournament against Clifton. And last year they lost him 32-31, and it almost felt like they were an Ismail Vertidor short of beating them because they go out this year to start the year and they beat them 41-23. So Passaic Tech's got a big piece, on their side this year. And those are two kids that are on my radar. Bill, who are some of the wrestlers on your radar to start the year?
I want to take a look at a couple kids at Clearview, which is obviously an up-and-coming program. Jimmy Rollins, now in his second year as the head coach, the former West Effort standout. Mason Nate, their heavyweight, was a 32 match winner 2 years ago at 190 pounds. Went 1-2 at Regions, but had a little bit of a tough draw there once he got to the quarters. He wrestled Brock Zarowski, who was from Lower Cape May, who's now at Ryder, and then after he lost to him. He got knocked out of the tournament by Mateo Vinciguerra from Woodstown, who is now a one of our state ranked heavyweights. So maybe a little bit of a tough draw for him after a really good season. Did not wrestle last year. Has come back as a senior as a heavyweight up 2 weight classes. Went out in his first tournament, won at the Pete Adams in Vineland. Pinned Maurice Matthews, is a very good heavyweight for Middle Township in that one. Got to the finals of the Marinelli, where he lost to Clifford Dirks, who I talked about earlier, who we kind of expect to be on the podium this year, was a blood rounder last year. He's off to a tremendous start. And then his teammate Cole Reese at 157, another senior who seems to have taken a big step. Last year, again, similar to Mason Nate, at Regions 1 and 2, won his pre-quarter final, lost in the quarters, lost his first round in the wrestlebacks to Jace Watson from Ocean City. This year in the Marinelli, he beat Watson 4-0 in the final. And Watson just actually wrestled Rhett Washleski from Hunterdon Central, and lost, who's we have, I think, ranked in our top 4 or 5 in at that weight class in the state, and only lost 4-2. So that kind of shows you where Cole Reese is. I think Clearview, again, a program that kind of back on the way up. It was a dominant team. Probably about a decade or so ago, and is kind of working their way back up. Has some kids that I'm going to be really kind of keeping an eye on going forward.
Yeah, and for me, I think there are 3 guys who have really caught my attention for one reason or another to start the year. All 3 of them state medalists, all from the Skyline Conference. Start with Gavin Hawk at Phillipsburg. Hawk, Princeton commit, made the state final last year, lost to Zach Belante of St. Joe's Montvale, who was out for the year. So that opens up potentially a path for Hawk to become Phillipsburg's first state champs since Brian Meyer, who went on to wrestle at Lehigh. And, I think he's ranked number 2 for us right now at 157 behind Southern's Wyatt Stout. But I think that weight is wide open. And I think Hawk's postseason experience down there in Atlantic City last year, coupled with Belante not being in the field, Stout won't be easy. Cage Jones won't be easy. But, I think Phillipsburg's best chance at, getting another state champion rests in Gavin Hawk, who's 11-1 this year. His only loss came out of state at the Bethlehem Holiday Classic to Colin Gadge of Quakertown. He's 10 wins away from tying the program's all-time wins record. He's 11 away from breaking it. He's looking to become the program's first 4-time HWS champion this weekend, and only potentially the 3rd ever to do that, along with Jojo Aragona and Eddie Ventresca from Pope John. So I think, he's somebody who Phillipsburg doesn't quite live and die as Hawk goes. They don't go as Hawk goes necessarily because he's only worth 6 points in a dual meet lineup at the end of the day. But, he is a bonus point machine. He wins a lot for them. He's a tone setter for them in the middle of the lineup. And so I think he's going to be one to keep an eye on, definitely as the season progresses. And then, I think the other interesting one is at 126. Anthony DeAndrea is a 2-time state medalist for Watchung Hills. We have him ranked 3rd in the state at 126 right now, behind Anthony Knox and Mikey Bautista of St. Joe's Montvale. But the thing with DeAndrea, the thing with Jaden Perez from Del Val, the thing with Colton Haggerty from Washington Township, with all these guys is, how long are they going to stay at 126 for? This is going to be Anthony Knox's weight to lose. So are these guys going to stay at 26 and settle for runner up? Or are they going to bump up to 32 or 38 or down to 20? But then that opens up the question of, well, is everybody going to try to do that? And then is that just going to make those weight classes tougher? So, like D'Andrea weighed in at 38 over the weekend in a duel against Bridgewater Raritan. Watchung Hills coach Jim Huff told me that was just a lineup maneuvering move. He wound up walking things off with a tech fall when Watchung Hills was down to Bridgewater 33-30. So I think he's going to be one to keep an eye on. And, he medaled at the Beast as he has the last few years. I think he's arguably the best wrestler in Somerset County, certainly one of. And, I think that him at that weight, he wrestled Paul Kenny tough last year in the semifinals at the state tournament. So I think, he's shown he can hang with the best guys and is sort of starting to break through to that upper echelon. But I think really, the big question for all those guys in that weight is what are they going to do come postseason time? And the other wrestler I wanted to touch on also at that weight is Del Val's Jaden Perez. He took fifth in the state last year. He's at 126 again this year. He's 14-0 to start the season. So he's off to a great start. He was undefeated for a lot of the early part of last year as well. And he is one of the few, tried and true, bona fide Atlantic City caliber wrestlers that Andy Fitz has in his lineup this year. Jackson Bush returns for Del Val. He made it to AC last year, but, Perez got on the podium. He's looking to become the program's first multi-time state medalist since Mike Pograz won 3 state medals in 2011, 12, and 13. So, I think he's got a chance to do something special. And he's another one who, he's a big driver for this lineup. And, even though he's only worth 6 points, I think he's somebody who Del Val is going to need to rely on if they want to continue their success, both as a team and individually.
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about some wrestlers who call them II, and interestingly, 3 of them are from Howell. And I'm going to start with the senior, Xavier Ortega. He suffered a knee injury early last season, missed the entire year. He just came back over the weekend. He's 2-0. He's at 144 pounds. Now, let's keep in mind, as a sophomore, this kid was 36-3 and was a win away from the podium. I think he's going to be a contender. I think they're going to take it slow with him. The big question is, how aggressive and how many points will he score as the season progresses? Howell also has an unbeaten freshman at 215 pounds. His name is Tim O'Rourke. He's 8-0, and that's a pretty nice combination there with sophomore Tanner Hodgkins. He's a state placer. He's 6-3 so far. And I think another young man that Shore Conference and state fans are going to love is CBA freshman Sean Kenny. Yes, that's Paul's little brother. And some people say Sean is better than Paul. I guess that'll remain to be seen. But we have Sean Kenny ranked at number 2 at 106. Fans, our wrestling rankings came out Tuesday morning. So those of you listening to us on Wednesday, you can find them right there on our wrestling homepage. And one of the things that has stayed with me is in some of our own discussions, Bill has talked a little bit about this particular senior class being as good as the one from 2006. Bill, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, you're obviously right now you have Knox at the top as the potential 4-timer, and then obviously Harvey Luddington, who could be a 3-time state champ, 4-time finalist, Alessio Parrington, who could be a 3-time state champ, Rocco Delgado could be a multiple-time state champ. Adrian De Jesus is injured now, but if he comes back, has a possibility to be a 3-time state champ. Caden Ricciardi could be a 2-time state champ. I mean, you got some kids in this class that are going to be historic, not only in New Jersey, but could definitely go on to the NCAAs and challenge for All-American status, could challenge for NCAA titles. The 2006 class had Mike Gray, who was the first 4-time state champ in the in state history, but also had Frank Molinaro, who was a three-time state champ, ended up being an NCAA champ, ended up being an Olympian. Had Jordan Burroughs, who was only a one-time state champion, but obviously went on to become maybe the greatest American wrestler ever, an Olympic gold medalist. Went on to win six world championships as well, I believe. Scott Winston, who was a three-time undefeated state champ, who didn't get a chance to go for four because he was injured as a freshman. Zach Ray was the heavyweight state champ that year. He went on to Lehigh. Was an All-American, was in the wrestled for the chance to go to for Olympic teams and world championships. Was one of the top U.S. heavyweights for a long time. So I think Darren Caldwell was an NCAA champ that was the state champ that year. So that was that's kind of the standard. That 2006. I think there's probably a couple of kids I forgot to mention, but this class, we'll see in the future, how they stack up. But this is definitely maybe not as good yet. We'll maybe know more in a decade, but it definitely stacks up with one of the best of all time.
All right, guys, we got one more segment here. And for this last segment, I want us to pick one thing to watch for this week. Each of us pick one thing. And for me, I have three letters regarding what to watch this week. HWS. The 15th Hunter and Warren Sussex tournaments at Phillipsburg on Saturday. And there's a lot to look forward to, whether it's team or individual. The team title race should be fascinating, as it always is. I mean, Hunter and Central beat Peterborough down the wire last year. It was its first ever team title. It was a fantastic race. We were watching it the whole way, and we knew it was going to come down to the wire. And Hunter and Central, and what was a well-rounded team for them last year, got it done. It's a field that also includes Del Val, Kittatinny, Pope John, High Point, Warren Hills, North Hunter, and Sparta, and a lot more programs that have a lot of wrestling prowess. There's a lot of state medalists on the mat. A kid I'm looking at is Donnie Almeida. He debuted with Pope John last week after he transferred in from St. Joe's Montvale, and I'm looking forward to seeing him in this field. We know how he can do against the state's best. He's a multi-time state medalist, but against this field with a lot of kids where, he's going to be wrestling a good bout, you'd think, in the quarters. And, I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do. And we could actually see him wrestle Luke Galetta if they both wrestle the same weight at 144. I'm interested to see what all the weight classes look like. State runner-ups Carson Walsh of Pope John and Jake mentioned Gavin Hawk. They're going for fourth titles at the HWS. State medalists in Jake Holly of Pope John and Galetta, like I just mentioned, are going for title number 3 at the event. And, that trip to Peterborough is a hike for me. I live walking distance from Bergen Catholic, but it's a trip I always enjoy making because the theater is always there. And, our guy, Brad Wilson, will also be there recapping some of the big stories too. But Bill, let's hear about these new Cinnamon duels.
Yeah, I'm kind of a fan of the dual meet tournaments. A lot of there's a ton of quads on the weekends. Nothing wrong with that, obviously. Teams get 3 matches in, but when you when you have a dual meet tournament, there's a bit of the unknown there. You don't know exactly who you're going to wrestle, and then obviously you're competing for a championship there at the end. Outside of the Williamstown duels that just happened. But I think I kind of like that, and there's some really good teams in this, and I think it's going to be a super competitive. The teams that we know are committed. I have not seen a schedule yet. I'll be interested to see how it's seeded. But Lower Cape May is in it. Again, they were 3-0 with the Williamstown duels, defending sectional champ, who's very strong again. You have Seneca, who's been a Group 3 contender. That's obviously been in the same group as Delsey, and just that's tough for anybody to get over. But they've been a very good team for a long time. I think they're going to contend here. St. Vincent's off to a decent start. You have Woodstown, who's one of the better teams in Group 1. Paulsboro is supposed to be part of the tournament. Obviously we talked about how they kind of struggled at the Boris, so they'll be looking to kind of get back here and see if they can win a team title after going 1-2 with the Boris. If they match up with Woodstown, I think that would be interesting. It could be a preview of a Group 1 final or Group 1 semifinal. And Haddonfield's off to a tough start, but they're a Group 2 contender that they could try to find their way. Haddon Township was also in the tournament. I think they're 3-3 at this point, a young Wall team that's off to a good start. So I think a really solid field, a lot of interesting teams here, and I think we're going to find out a lot about all of them by the end of the day, by the time they wrestle three times. And to me, Lower Cape May, Seneca would probably be the two best teams that could potentially be the final, depending on how the seasons come out. But again, keep an eye out for Paulsboro, Wall, Cinnaminson, or Woodstown could all be in the mix. And the first year for this tournament, and if this is the standard, I think it'll be a good one.
Well, I had talked to Cinnaminson athletic director Brian Wilkinson, and one thing that may interest the fans is that he said he's going to go with 4 mats, so that tournament's going to move along. Some of the things that's caught my eye, and I'm going to start with a number 20, our top 20. We've had our preseason rankings out now since earlier on in December, and we're about to unleash our first regular season rankings. And oh my goodness, that conference call is going to be about 2 hours, I think. After some of these results, I mean, St. Joe, number 2 in the preseason, I mean, they could drop 7, 8, 9 after the loss to CBA and the Catholic duels. And then 2 dual meets in the Shore right out of the gate on Wednesday night could really reshape the top 10. Christian Brothers is at Rumson. Now, Rumson has not wrestled their full team anywhere yet. They've spread them out all over the place. They have a state champion in Sonny Amato. They have some really good wrestlers top to bottom. And we know that CBA appears to be without their heavyweight who's injured again. So, and Rumson has a very good heavyweight in Matt Smith. So that's an interesting dual meet. That is Wednesday night, 6 o'clock at Rumson. And then at 7 o'clock at St. John Vianney, and I think this is just going to be epic, is Southern at St. John Vianney. I mean, you're talking about 2 teams that have plenty of firepower, and now St. John Vianney has, a state champion sitting at heavyweight, which I expect to be very pivotal in the match. But, I think fans have something to look forward to, and as do we, when that top 20 is released on Friday morning. What do you got, Jake?
Yeah, and so, Ryan, he'll be at HWS. The other big county tournament going on this weekend is out at Hillsborough, Somerset County tournament. We think of kind of the Skyline Conference as the Del Vals, the Hunterdon Central, the Peaburgs of the world. But, there are some good Somerset County teams. There are some good Somerset County wrestlers who definitely deserve a mention. Ridge won this tournament last year as part of their run to the Group 4 title. It was their first Somerset County title in, I think, close to 35 years it was last year, and they stopped Hillsborough from getting a three-peat. I know Hillsborough coach Reese Weinberger said, his team is hungry to get back atop the podium. But, as you guys know, a lot of these individual tournaments, they're not won by how many guys you have in the finals or how many guys get their hand raised at the end. They're won by getting bonus points, and they're won in the consolation and the medal matches. Because, Watchung Hills, for instance, last year had 3 champs, I think it was, and still finished, well outside Ridge for the county title. So, same thing with Hillsborough. They had 2 champs, and they still finished well behind Ridge. So I think, those matches on the margins are going to be the ones to watch and keep an eye on. And I think that's what, really makes these tournaments interesting. And then the other thing that stood out to me rather was, last year, 9 different teams out of the, however many were in the field had a champ last year at the Somerset County tournament. So that shows there's parity. That shows the field is wide open. It shows that, you don't have to just be from a big school like Ridge or Watchung Hills or Bridgewater. You can be somebody like Trip Freitag from Manville, who's looking to become that program's first ever 3-time county champ this weekend, with longtime coach Pat Corbituk back at the helm after a year as the AD. So I think, that's what these county tournaments are great for is, they birth stars, they show us guys who maybe weren't on our radar, who we didn't know much about. And I think it's a great way to get to know and get to see some teams that you might not otherwise.
So that puts a bow on episode number 1 of Weighing In. Like I said, you can listen to us on all podcast platforms, and you'll be hearing from us every week as we break down all you need to know in Garden State Wrestling. We want to thank our producer, Brian Decon, for putting this production together. He runs the operation, and this doesn't happen without his efforts. So we thank you, Brian. And we also thank you all for listening and reading our content each and every week. You'll hear us again next week for episode number 2. Take care, everyone.